Rouge Area Chamber in April 2008. He's a native of Lake Charles, and he previously served as the Deputy Director of the Louisiana Recovery Authority. Prior to his LRA tenure, he served as Economic Development Advisor to 2 governors and the Policy Director for the Louisiana Economic Development. So, Adam, why don't you come on up?
Thank you, and I'm really privileged to be here. As y'all know, our organization leads economic development in the 9-parish region. I think the context for that is what we want to try to share today, is what we've been doing over the last year, and then somewhat of our outlook for this year. But in setting that context, I think it helps just to refresh everyone's understanding of how we operate as an organization. If there is interest for those in the media who want to have kind of some supporting slides we put together, we have those available to you that we can shoot out after the event. I know that we didn't have, with a slight change at the last minute, availability for a screen, but I don't think it's incredibly necessary to go through kind of what we want to go through. Our organization, during the course of the pandemic, did a lot of work to better understand the nature of economic development for the capital region, especially if we kind of think of this moment as kind of this post-COVID economic moment for Louisiana, for the capital region. We also reset that our purpose for our organization needs to be clear for everyone. Why do we exist? And our whole reason to exist is to accelerate economic opportunity in the Baton Rouge area for everyone. And that was after kind of a lot of work with our strategic planning firm, our board, a lot of the business community, to better understand why we exist. Our mission and vision statement had been the same for probably the last 20 years, and we felt it was important as we kind of enter into this new moment, a new strategic plan, to understand best who we are and how we serve the business community of the 9 parishes. The other thing that I think is valuable to reset for everybody is that our grounding is based on a data set. We actually did an enormous amount of research in 2021 to really better understand who we are as a Baton Rouge area. And we took a data set of comparing Baton Rouge to about 40 other places. That data set was looking at mid-sized metros in the southeastern portion of the U.S., and that data set was able to help us understand not just how we all probably traditionally think of economic development, which is in this context of projects that are making a decision about whether they're going to invest in a community. But in reality, the frame of economic development is much more complicated than that. You're looking at kind of the income, you're looking at your gross regional product, you're looking at your production of talent, your connectedness, the infrastructure you have to meet the needs of the economy. You're looking at the inclusiveness of your economy, meaning does it give opportunity to everyone? And you're also looking at the data on your community's livability. And the broad framework of all that data is what we tracked as we thought about our new 5-year plan. And in doing that work, we actually reset our goals to understand our work in economic development. And in 2022, when we released this about a year ago, March of last year, we shared with the public that the work of economic development between 2022 and the year 2026, that 5-year window, will be a talent-driven economic development strategy, a significant shift in how we think about economic development to make sure they kind of put first and foremost in our mind's eye the importance of being attractive to retaining and attracting people who can move anywhere. And we know, of course, with remote work capabilities being accelerated by the pandemic, that trend has been something we've watched closely nationally, how that data trend has been affecting us as a community, but also what it changes in terms of our ability to compete. But the biggest thing that we noticed most in that is the ability for our community to go after new talent moving here or retaining existing talent in our market is probably the most important thing when a company is making an investment decision. Whether they're already in the Baton Rouge area or they're thinking about moving to the Baton Rouge area, they're oftentimes asking, and first and foremost, about our availability of talent and to be able to support that talent. The second big thing we saw in the data, which is our second priority of our strategic goals, is that we have to push more aggressively to diversify our area economy. Over the 6 years of data before the pandemic, the dominant source of industry growth, job growth in Baton Rouge was actually from industrial construction. We saw a surge of investment activity that led to an amazing amount of job creation What was interesting is when we looked out across the 40 places we compared ourselves with, that the biggest source of job growth in Baton Rouge was in construction, and of the 40 cities, we were #1 where that was our source of job creation. And so it was an imbalance, and it pointed to the need to have a more diverse source of job creation as an economy. The third big goal of our 5-year plan that we shared last year is we have to create a more inclusive economy. When we looked at those 40 cities, in the aggregate data for what we call economic inclusion, the Baton Rouge area was ranked 39th out of the 40 cities for those outcomes related to economic inclusion. And so we said the third big priority has to be able to create a more inclusive economy for the Baton Rouge area. And then the fourth pillar of our work is to enhance our region's livability. We looked at that across a wide variety of factors, from infrastructure, traffic congestion, community appearance related to blight or litter, or just the quality of life for young professionals choosing to stay here or move here. And that data set, those 4 big priorities, we also see that they all are deeply interconnected. To be successful at talent requires you to have a more diverse economy. To be successful at talent means you have to have all those efforts related to inclusion and livability front and center to be able to address those needs. And so we laid out this big, broad plan. And probably most daunting, I think, for me as CEO and for our team was most of the things we outlined that we would do in late 2021, early 2022, when we were putting this plan together. These were things we don't have a history of doing. We don't have a strategy that had been laid out yet about how to do those things. And so as a leader, you get both excited about new ideas, but you also get very scared about your ability to execute on things. You're not exactly sure how that is going to happen. And so we stand here today at the outset of 2023 with enthusiasm that the things we said we were going to get started in 2022, largely we've had success in getting almost all of them launched. What we said for our 2023 goals is our work plan would essentially finish the implementation, setting up all those priorities that'll get us on track to our goals for 2026. And so let me lay out for you what our major priorities are for 2023. And these are all on our website at brac.org/bringit, which is the name of our 5-year strategic plan. The first is that we're going to be launching a new talent recruitment campaign funded by a joint grant that we got in partnership with Visit Baton Rouge last year to do what a lot of our competitor cities and the mid-sized cities in the South have already been doing, which is marketing their region to young professionals to explain and show the job opportunities and the quality of life available in the Baton Rouge area. We're going to talk more about that, but it's a very exciting piece of this work that you'll see launching shortly. The second thing that we have an opportunity to do as we push forward is to diversify our economy by looking at opportunities presented by energy transition and renewable projects. We'll show more about what that is, but an enormous amount of activity happening in that space. The third big pillar that we're working on is to think more about how do you boost positive perceptions of the Baton Rouge area. One of the things we saw in our factors related to livability are our own perceptions of livability don't keep up with reality as much as they need to, and that's on us to make sure that the Baton Rouge area is doing more to make sure we're aware of those things that are available, that are heading in the right direction, even as we try to challenge those things that need to be fixed and move forward that are still major challenges. We need to make sure we're also boosting awareness of those positive things that are happening and going in the right direction. The fourth big thing that we've already launched as a part of our work that we laid out last year is that we want to make sure that inside of our own organization, we are making available business intelligence research to our companies and our communities across the state. We just launched something called Riverbend Research as a sort of a fee-for-service contract research organization inside of BRAC that also enables us to be more innovative in how we diversify our own revenue streams as a nonprofit to make sure that we're thinking about services we can offer the business community even as we push forward to diversify the economy. And the last really pillar of this work that we said we would do last year that we were really pushing hard this year to work out the details of, be to think about what does it look like to have a for-profit redevelopment fund that we help catalyze this to come into existence. We had a grant last year that was provided to us by one of our local foundations to really look at the idea, as we've seen in other cities, of organizing the capital of Baton Rouge to drive reinvestment in disinvested neighborhoods. What does it look like to have capital that you can look for opportunities for reinvestment say in commercial blighted properties in North Baton Rouge or in Donaldsonville or in other communities, where you have opportunities to make reinvestments that you can pool resources to see what those opportunities might be. And we've seen communities that have done this, and we're kind of putting some plans together on how to execute that. So all of those big pillars, if we can get all those on track this year, those are the big major initiatives that we said last year we would get on track. And when we can get those underway this year, that'll put us well on our goals that we said for 2026, that every major initiative that we outlined last year will have a path to being implemented by the time we get to the end of our second year of this 5-year plan. One of the other things we said we would do is that we wanted to be more transparent and accountable as an organization. Just, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we put out a press release announcing something called Progress by the Numbers. And for the members of the media who are here, the Fourth Estate, we want you to see the data of how Baton Rouge is doing and be able to intersect that information as you do reporting about what's going on in Baton Rouge, that you know how to find out data on everything related to those 4 big pillars we just outlined. So if you go to our website at brac.org/insights, for the first time, you're going to be able to see kind of what that available data looks like. You'll be able to flip through data on talent, and you'll see, for example, trends that you see on higher education data. You'll be able to see data related to diversifying the economy, everything from how many more establishments have been organized in Baton Rouge, new businesses have been organized in Baton Rouge, or the new jobs being added by firms across different sectors. You can see how many are available in healthcare, how many new firms have been added under software or technology, how many new firms have been coming into transitional energy. All that you'll be able to track on our website. They go that. So I just invite you to spend some time looking at that. It's broken down by industry groups, so you can actually go through and say, oh, I want to really drill into data on diversity, or I really want to drill into data on economic inclusion. And when you get there, for example, on economic inclusion, you'll see a data point that you can pull out that says, what is the average household income broken out by ethnic and racial subgroups for the Baton Rouge area. You'll be able to pull out sort of the gap between white, black, and Hispanic household incomes, which is one of the challenges we saw in our data, is those gaps are stark across our community. We wanted to be able to be transparent about how that looks so that everybody can understand that, unpack it, and hopefully see solutions to moving forward on each of these goals. So that's what the Progress by the Numbers website is going to provide. It's there for media, but it's also there for anybody in the public who's just curious to better understand the data. This is something we're going to update annually as new data becomes available. You'll be able to track these major indicators. And these data now go back usually 4 or 5 years. You'll be able to track numbers on each of these indicators going forward. But under each of those 4 goals, there's probably 12 or 15 different data indicators you can track. And if there are ones that you'd like to see that aren't there, that you think are important ones to measure that we're not looking at, we would invite anybody to bring us other suggestions of things that should be tracked in our data. So with that, I want to now kind of turn and tell you a little bit more about some of our work in those specific pillars. And we've been doing this by kind of challenging some core perceptions, I think, that people have about the Baton Rouge area. And perhaps in our own ways that we describe our community or our metro area, we fall back to a handful of things that people might say about Baton Rouge that sometimes that are not exactly true, or the facts don't back that up. The first one is that I think people oftentimes will describe the Baton Rouge area economy and say, no, we're an oil and gas economy. That's the only sector that you can actually see in the Baton Rouge area economy. And that's simply not true. What's fascinating is, by the data, Baton Rouge has the 13th most diverse economy in the country. We have looked out at the data that's available on 384 metropolitan areas that there are in the U.S. Of all those 384, we're the 13th most diverse economy. And we'll share with you, if you'd like to see it, kind of what does that look as a pie chart when you spread out how many people are employed in all the different industry sectors in Baton Rouge, how much more diverse it is than people recognize. Oftentimes I use this comparison, say, to Houston. We think of the Houston economy as kind of, they are an energy capital for certain. But they are also dominated by what you see with MD Anderson and healthcare services as an economy. When you think about job growth in the Baton Rouge area, we had 7% job growth in healthcare last year. Easily a dominant part of our economy that we don't necessarily step back and think, this is a similar trajectory we see happening here in Baton Rouge. And increasingly, healthcare services are being sought in the dense available resources in our healthcare economy from all across the state, even outside of the state. Last year, we had the opportunity to go and spend time talking about what does Metamore look like as a clinical trial services organization inside of Pennington. Well, you now have folks seeking out health care that are available at our research centers, like at Pennington. Metamore is our focus on bariatric surgery and metabolic services, where they can actually do healthcare intake assessments on folks who are chronically or morbidly obese, who want to come in to make sure that they understand the latest of science and healthcare services that are available. So it's really incredible to see what does that look like as something that can be very specialty care that's available here in the Baton Rouge area. The other thing that I think folks don't realize is just how much has happened in transitional energy over the last 2 years. So since 2020, we've probably had $25 billion of feasibility project announcements in transitional energy alone. Of those, probably $2 billion made their final investment decision just last year. In our total pipeline of activity today, we have about 50 active projects considering a location in the Baton Rouge area. If they all were to occur, which never is how that plays out, you have roughly 7,000 jobs and $10 billion of capital investment across those that are in our pipeline of activity. But the most significant of which are the amazing amount of projects that are considering their investment possibilities that are in transitional or renewable fuels. So transitional energy or renewable fuels. And so for context for that, you might hear of folks that are planning a blue ammonia project or a green hydrogen project, or they're looking at a way to produce sustainable aviation fuel out of agricultural products that will use our location on the Mississippi River as the sourcing of feedstocks from the entire upper Midwest all the way down to our ports here in Louisiana. And that opportunity positions us incredibly well to look forward to, as these companies all of our major industrial companies along the river are making incredible commitments to being net zero on carbon emissions by 2050. They have this big challenge of how they're going to get there. And so we actually see this investment horizon window as one that's just beginning, but we're going to be incredibly well positioned to see what do these new companies, new investments look like as they unfold. The second big thing that we hear, I think, as a trope is this idea that everybody is moving away from the Baton Rouge area. And so let's talk a little bit about kind of what does it look like in terms of mobility and talent. In fact, in the data of Baton Rouge, we've seen net positive in migration into Baton Rouge for the last 3 years in our data. We have, I think, if you compare us to mid-sized metros, we're up there with places like Greenville, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, Oklahoma City. In the data of mid-sized metros, we're actually seeing a substantial kind of on a per capita basis win in terms of overall migration. There was about 9,000 more folks moved in than moved out over the course of the last available data. That equates to about 23 people per day moving into the Baton Rouge area to live somewhere in our capital region. And so that's exciting to see that trend continues to accelerate. What we need to make sure we focus on are those places where we still have challenges in the data. Where we're doing really well, as one example, is in our university enrollment. We're up about 10,000 college kids in the last 5 years of data. We're at close to 59,000 college students in the Baton Rouge area economy, which is incredible to think about what that is. If you want to use that as an asset to grow, you would absolutely want to start with that to think about what are we going to do to propel our opportunities as an economy. We're going to do it based upon those close to 60,000 university and college students that we have across our 5 higher education institutions in the Baton Rouge area. What we have to do more aggressively, we find, is doing more to make sure that job opportunities are presented and are available to those students. And so as we look at our priorities for 2023, let me mention something that we started 2 years ago and we've had some success with, which is our focus on Handshake internship partnerships. And so Handshake is an app that is available to all college students. It's available for free to all businesses in the Baton Rouge area. You can download the app. What we've seen increasingly is businesses are putting their internships onto Handshake as a means of making sure that students know how to find out about all the available job opportunities in the Baton Rouge area. In the last 2 years, we've gone up from a year ago, we had about 1,000 internships on Handshake. In 2022, we had about 2,000 internships posted on Handshake. Again, this is data that you can find on our data dashboard. So we're seeing that our push to encourage more businesses to get onto Handshake is in fact working, and increasingly those are small and mid-sized employers gaining access to the talent that are at our higher education institutions. That's going to be a big piece of our focus. I've already talked to you about the fact that we're going to launch our talent marketing campaign. It's a huge part of what we've got to do to go after, especially 25 to 44-year-olds, learning about the job opportunities that are here, especially if they are formally here, they grew up here, they went away, or they've never lived in Baton Rouge and they're trying to decide where to live. Oftentimes when we're visiting with an employer and their HR staff are saying, hey, I have challenges convincing somebody to look at a job opportunity in Baton Rouge, our talent marketing campaign will build a regional dashboard or a sort of data center that will help any individual, any family that's trying to decide whether this is the right place for them. It becomes kind of a landing page for every HR company, every HR resource in the Baton Rouge area to use that as a way to talk about how and when to choose to move to Baton Rouge. And so that resource will be a part of what we launch this calendar year with our talent marketing campaign. The last one I want to mention in our talent work has to do with something we actually are putting together through our Talent Action Collaborative. Last year we launched a new initiative based on something we saw out of Jacksonville, Florida, and out of Nashville, Tennessee, where the business community has really organized by its industry sectors all of their employers by those categories. So we have a technology commission. We have a commission focused on construction and manufacturing companies. We have one that's focused on healthcare and the needs of life sciences. Each one of those industry groups has 20 or 30 companies that meet to help guide the needs of the education partners in the Baton Rouge area to know what those sectors needs in terms of their hiring. What we recognize, however, is what we haven't been doing enough of is helping high school students get access to internships while they're still in high school. Many may remember kind of what vocational education was like when they were growing up, but what we don't see is the same nature that we had perhaps decades ago as we may need today. In the Baton Rouge area, let's just kind of envision this, there's about 8,000 roughly high school students who are seniors right now. And those high school seniors, by the data from the state, roughly 50% of those, roughly 4,000, will go on to a four-year degree. So there's roughly 4,000 other students that could be looking for a two-year associate's degree or a path straight into a job. And our goal is going to be to make sure that we help give more employers a way to understand what those job opportunities look like and how to offer those job opportunities to students. In collaboration with East Baton Rouge School System, this past year we committed that we would work toward a goal of 1,000 students who are in high school today gaining access to an internship this year. And we're actually staffing up 2 dedicated positions on our team that all they will do is help both talk to employers about placement of jobs and then collaborating with our educational institutions, mostly high schools, around the 9-parish area, closely working with EBR schools to help make sure that employers know how to offer those internship opportunities to students. I'll push this out there today to say, for this coming summer, we'd love to have employers who are thinking about this learn about what it looks like to go after employing folks not only during the school year, but also during the summer internship opportunities. And so there's a link on our website if folks are interested to gain access to this or you want to show it on your newscast. We've got a QR code that folks can scan where any employer can sign up to get set up for an internship, even for this summer. Our deadline is April 17th to try to get toward high school summer internships being set up. All of this is part of a continuum of thinking about what does it look like to build a long-term pipeline of talent for the Baton Rouge area to accomplish what is necessary for our regional labor force. The third thing I think that we hear from employers is that, or generally I think is a perception of Baton Rouge, is that no one's willing to deal with kind of the complicated sort of elephant in the room that is kind of the race dynamics in Baton Rouge. In our organization, we saw this quite a lot over the last 3 years as we started talking about the data of economic inclusion. Of course, we all watched in horror of what happened when George Floyd was killed, and the community conversations that we had in Baton Rouge in 2020 and into 2021 as part of our own planning as an organization challenged us to think even more about what we can do at the intersection of economic development and economic inclusion. And so I would say economic opportunity can and should expand for everyone. What does it look like for our organization to be a part of that work? Well, last year, as part of that new 5-year campaign, we took a diversity in business event that we've hosted for a number of years. We expanded it substantially. We hosted it at the River Center, sold out event. Large businesses wanting to come together and meet with smaller employers. So it looks like, what does it look like to actually have ways to diversify their procurement of small, local, minority-owned firms? We had a lot of sort of business-to-business networking. We also had companies wanting to come in and talk about their own diversity and inclusion practices as companies. All of that was able to be discussed through the course of that symposium and had, just like I said, a great turnout of folks who were interested in it. We also last year launched something we've never done before, which is to build our own minority business accelerator. So we were looking for a way to find ways to work with existing businesses who have already reached some success but want to get bigger faster. And we looked out across the country. We saw Cincinnati Chamber, Tampa Bay in Florida, their chamber, the Greenville, South Carolina chamber that we just went on a canvas trip to go visit. All of them had, and inside of their chamber, a minority business accelerator that had been in business either for a long time or they were just starting it in the last few years. And we said, hey, we want one of those too. That's really looks like a great program. So last year, working with a lot of local companies, we were able to launch that. We launched it. We call it Drive. It's sponsored by ExxonMobil, who gave us our kind of a kickoff grant to get that started. And the Drive Accelerator last year, we were, like with all of these goals, nervous about the reception we would receive. We put it out there that we wanted to have companies that had $500,000 in revenue or at least 5 employees apply to this program. Well, we had 40 companies apply to be in it. We ultimately selected 11 companies to participate. They're about halfway through their cohort experience. Those 11 companies have collectively $54 million in revenue already, and these are companies that are really looking to grow that. And imagine, as they've kind of expressed to us, what if collectively we had $100 million in revenue from these 11 companies? What if we do this now for the remainder of our 5-year campaign through 2026, and we'll be able to see like 50 or 60 companies potentially have been able to go through that accelerator that are a part of what that growth looks like. It gives you, I think, just chills to think about what that can do to help create a more inclusive economy in the Baton Rouge area, not only creating wealth within those companies, but supporting those companies as they are able to reinvest in the communities where they operate. And that's what we hope is going to be driven by this program, why we call it Drive. Now, the last one I want to talk about, I think, is a trope that's related to kind of that first idea about talent and the fact that everybody's moving away. It has to do more with quality of life, and it's a perception that we hear that there's no quality of life, especially for young professionals. Why would they stay? And that trope, I think, can be challenged probably easiest by what Garth Brooks said on Good Morning America when he went on to brag about his show across national audiences, saying, you're a very lucky entertainer if you get to play in Death Valley in Baton Rouge. And I think it's awesome that we had 110,000 folks, whatever it was, who came to enjoy that show. But what's more exciting about it is that we had a 3.5-minute earthquake that was about Baton Rouge, right? There was this idea that we were enthusiastic about ourselves, and you want to find a way to bottle up that enthusiasm and really help spread that virally with enthusiasm about who we are as a place and how proud we are as a place. It also doesn't hurt to get enthusiastic national entertainment sort of headlines and national news when you have shows like that. But we also recognize that we don't necessarily take stock of the changes in our own quality of life. We had a CEO who moved to town as part of a company last year who said as he moved here from a similar, actually a slightly larger size, mid-sized metro in our kind of geographic area of the southeast portion of the U.S., he's like, Adam, y'all don't realize the food options you have here are so much better than most of the places. And I think we take it for granted that that is a big factor of why you live in a place, is that the quality of life choices that we make have a lot to do with what happens on nights and on weekends. And the fact that we've actually doubled the number of restaurants and bar choices that we have in the Baton Rouge area over the last 20 years, we don't necessarily pay attention to that, the pace of which we've been in that change. 530 more restaurants open today than were open just 20 years ago. And that change has been happening is also primarily driven by local food choices that are started by entrepreneurs that create a very unique local food scene that is a part of what makes this a special place. When we do national data research about what makes us unique, food choices are up there in terms of why people think Baton Rouge and Louisiana stand out. Right up there with our climate, by the way. We think about the warm weather, although it's not warm today. The warm weather and sort of that southern tropical climate is up there is why people have kind of a positive perception. What's interesting is our uniqueness of our food choices is something not to be taken for granted. The other thing that's amazing is we perhaps don't realize, although it's nice to see that we get some recognition for it this year, that we have one of the best outdoor sort of green space scenes of mid-sized cities like the Baton Rouge area. BRAC being named sort of the #1 park system in America is not something to be taken for granted because it's a big part of why people choose to move to a place. If they want to be in a climate where they have access to being outdoors, they want to know so that there's a lot of green space to go and enjoy it. part of why we were thrilled to see BRAC get the recognition that they get is that part of telling Baton Rouge's national story as a place that has a lots of available green space. The other thing that I think people don't realize that a lot of cities that are our size in the South do point out is the residential growth, the population and residential growth in their downtown area. In Baton Rouge, we've seen 25% increase in our residential population in downtown in the last decade. And as we see buildings like what's happening at the Chase South Tower, kind of under renovation to add more residential units. We've seen that those units that were renovated at the Commerce Building or the Heron Building, they have 90% occupancy rates in downtown, and they've enjoyed that even during sort of the period of the pandemic and after the pandemic. And so it's interesting to see what does that transition look like as investors come in, they make bets on the downtown area. That vibrancy is something that everybody sees as a value proposition across the region and even nationally as we think about the story of Baton Rouge, as we go out and promote why come to Baton Rouge, why live in Baton Rouge. A big piece of that story has to do with kind of the vibrancy of the downtown area. The other cool story in our quality of life, although it's tangential to that, we had $82 million in film production. Things like National Treasure, making a show based in Baton Rouge, but it's primarily a love song to Baton Rouge. If you've watched it, and I've no spoiler alerts if you want to go and jump on it, but what's fascinating is there are scenes and stories that are based in Baton Rouge that kind of tell the story of Baton Rouge on our behalf. Using that film spend as a way to help promote Baton Rouge to national audiences. The last thing I'll note that really is a transition from 7 and 8 years ago, we have $2.5 billion of committed capital to major transportation solutions in the Baton Rouge area. And as we know, transportation is one of our greatest challenges, and congestion is one of our greatest challenges. You would say, oh, if there is no hope for a change to come, that you can only be afraid and concerned about what that means for the future. And in fact, we have an enormous amount of investment that's being made to try to address those congestion challenges that we face as a community. And that's really a bet on our future that's being made by our own residents who have passed tax elections to invest in our infrastructure, as well as the state and federal government looking at investment opportunities as we see enormous money coming to the state of Louisiana under that big bipartisan infrastructure bill. So what is BRAC doing this coming year? Well, one, under all of our goals related to livability, we're focusing on things like litter and blight and quality of place. We have an ongoing work with our Quality of Place Committee. Something we hope to see introduced at the Metro Council in the next couple of weeks is a signage ordinance looking at blighted commercial signs on some of our major corridors, something that our team has been working with some volunteers from the Business Report and other places to work on. And so we think that's going to be something that continues to move the ball forward on things related to beautification and livability. The second thing to highlight is the work that we've been excited about for a long time on intercity passenger rail. You just saw the news, and I think there was an opinion piece in the Advocate today that we finally see progress that Canadian Pacific, working with Kansas City Southern, have reached an agreement to merge. Their merger statements, if you look at the documents online, show that they have made commitments as part of that they are committed to the Baton Rouge, New Orleans intercity rail connector. And they made that as part of the announcements when that merger was being announced last week by the Surface Transportation Board. So with enthusiasm, we see the path forward finally. It feels like after 20 years of waiting that this intercity rail project looks like it's going to be on track here shortly. The other big exciting movement we've seen over the last year, of course, we knew that there was $300 million committed toward the new bridge. Another $55 million a year of dedication toward construction of a new bridge. Those two sources make the bridge closer to reality than it's ever been. We actually put up a whole page on our website at brac.org/bridge. You can kind of see the timeline and the duration of pieces of what has to happen to get that in place. We're seeing that coupled with kind of the widening project on I-10 as major steps forward to addressing what our data has shown us for a very long time are necessary pieces to get in place. Not one project, but all of them cumulatively are the ones that are going to be able to help us get off some of the worst lists for congestion in America. The last one I want to talk about is what we did to launch SafeBR. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to kind of go on our website, go on the safebr.org website to look at the images of this coalition. We're now at over 220 companies who have joined in community organizations, nonprofits, government agencies, law enforcement agencies, all part of SafeBR as a broad-based coalition. And what gave us goosebumps at the press conference was not only how diverse the group working together is, but how many different facets of government leadership were standing up to be a part of that work. You saw judges in the room, you saw the Metro Council in the room, you saw the mayor's office, you saw law enforcement, but you saw also a broad base of businesses and nonprofits saying, we know it's an issue, but we want to be part of the solution, not just harping on the problem of public safety. And that coalition is one that's been working behind the scenes on initiatives like what you saw us announce, the Paige Rice Camera Initiative, which announced even before SafeBR announced, where businesses can install cameras on their own business locations, working with the law enforcement. They're directly tied in to the Baton Rouge Police Department and the Sheriff's Department into their real-time crime centers. We've now seen over $80,000 worth of cameras purchased through that website by businesses installing cameras for their own businesses, and then another total about $200,000 of donations or purchases that have come in for cameras that are installing those, like you saw at our press conference where the Triple S grocery store has now installed one donated by our initiative, by Paul Rice, to put that in place where Devin Page was unfortunately killed. That you see that donation now paying for a camera that's installed to help prevent future crime at that location. Another one is expected to be installed shortly on Government Street. But you'll have this network of these really precision crime cameras being installed as just one aspect of public safety moving forward with the leadership of SafeBR. That coalition is going to be meeting on a bi-monthly or a quarterly basis over the course of this year, really finding key initiatives each time that they're going to be able to move forward. They're also putting out weekly communications to the members of that group about the progress they're making forward on SafeBR. We're hopeful if anybody has not joined who is interested in doing so, you can go to safebr.org. There's no cost to join. It's welcome to anybody who wants to be a part of the solution. Find your own way for yourself, your organization, your nonprofit to be engaged in this work. So in closing, I'll say this about Baton Rouge. We have an abundant amount of opportunity. Our economy has now eclipsed our pre-pandemic job numbers. We're now back above where we were in terms of overall jobs in the Baton Rouge area. We've fully recovered our losses, and we see this pipeline of growth in terms of economic investment that's coming. Now is our time to really press forward our advantages and make sure that our economy is there and accessible to everyone, as you see in our purpose statement. With that, we have a plan. We have a lot of great collaborative partnerships, and we would invite anyone who would like to be a part of this work to come to our website and find out more at BRAC.org. So with that, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you. So thank you for the question. The question was, are the layoffs that are being announced at Amazon nationally going to affect in any way the plans that are being made at Cortana? The answer is no. All of the commitments that they have made are related to the layoffs and announcements that were made are all related to corporate jobs across Amazon. Their plans continue forward for Cortana as they've announced. And if you go out there, we drove by it over the weekend. It's incredible to see kind of what's happened out there. So we should continue on forward with what's been announced already.
In your opinion, what is BRAC's biggest challenge to achieving y'all's 5-year plan?
So the question is, what are BRAC's biggest challenges to achieve our 5-year plan? I think I'd say 3 things. One is our need to make sure that our entire region and our entire community is thinking about how to be as attractive as possible to 25 to 44-year-olds. We've primarily challenged our organization and our community to think about everything it takes to push forward, to both be attractive to and committed to the work to try to bring more folks in or to retain folks in that age range. By the data, we do well in almost every age range except 25 to 35-year-olds. And so in our broad goals, largely we're thinking about our talent marketing campaign, our work with universities, our work with our pipeline of talent coming out of high schools. All of that, we're thinking about kind of this track into kind of that young professional age range. And so I think that's a huge challenge I think we have to all kind of focus on. Over the last 7 years of data, we've continued to have net out-migration in that age range. And I think it's important that we just be honest about what that looks like, but it's also about a matter of like making sure that we're thinking about what does it look like to make sure that livability continues to get up, go higher, we have more ways for folks to connect to resources, and that businesses are playing each of their own roles, whether that's hiring more college interns, focusing more on sort of how to get folks engaged. That's a huge deal, I think, that they've got to be focused on. I think the second big challenge I think we face is our region's perception of itself. And we think a lot about how we promote our own story to ourselves as a factor of how people choose to live in a place. And so we think about measuring our own perceptions of the Baton Rouge area and how do you move that number forward. Well, a lot of that comes with just a sense of embracing community pride. We see it after natural disasters. The question is whether you see it kind of in your regular everyday life, that you can find ways to promote those positive stories, and knowing it has a lot to do with how folks choose to move to a place. As they find word of mouth stories, and that enthusiasm is something that we think is something you can carry forward, and you can build a lot more by being kind of intentional on our part about how to tell those stories. And then the third big thing is we have to continue to move forward during the course of a gubernatorial and a legislative election this year to make sure that candidates are focused on big priorities that Louisiana and the Baton Rouge area we think will need to continue to move forward. And so as we think about the next cycle, these elections that are coming up, talking about infrastructure priorities, talking about young professionals and talent, those are the kinds of priorities we want to see as part of the gubernatorial sort of election cycle that are coming up this fall.
The transitional energy projects you mentioned, I know a lot of them have a carbon capture element. I was wondering if you could quantify that a little bit, and also what concerns do you have around the sort of grassroots opposition that we're seeing to carbon capture?
So the question is about how many of the projects, or what's the kind of the nature of carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration projects as a part of the whole picture of what's happening, and then what level of concern do we have about what's happening. I think first and foremost, I think it's important that that community leaders, that citizens, there's a lot of information that has to be discovered about what is carbon capture, what is carbon sequestration, and what does the science mean. I think what we've been hoping is that, and looking forward to, is that experts in this work that are impartial to this come forward. And LSU, for example, has some great folks who've been looking at the science of this for a very long time, are some of the best resources to help kind of explain it to local elected officials, concerned citizens, residents, local businesses, anyone who wants information. Those resources we found are the best ones to find out what is fact from fiction about what carbon sequestration is and isn't. We do expect that carbon sequestration, carbon capture, is a big piece of every company thinking about how to get toward net zero. In the long run, it plays a piece of it. It's not the whole story, but is a piece of just about every company's path toward net zero emissions. And so as we think about kind of lower carbon emissions and we think about kind of cleaner air, in general, a big piece of that comes from that source of the solution, that piece of the solution that comes from carbon sequestration. And so thinking about how that unfolds is something that communities are looking at, but so are organizations like ours that think about how does that actually play out for companies that are trying to get to these net zero goals as one piece of that solution. And so I think that's a piece of this, is they've got to share what that looks like, what does the science look like, and what are their plans, and in reality, what phase are we in right now? Most of the projects that have started are in the very beginning of trying to evaluate the feasibility of doing it. And so I think going along with this is to understand they're making decisions about whether it works for them, not just about whether it's good or bad. And so I think we're in this kind of early phase of exploration and what that looks like still. I think for us is to be kind of a resource for information, helping kind of folks connect to resources or experts who can explain the science. Lane.
Perhaps in job share, we are not, as you say, an oil and gas town, but in terms of economic output, wealth, GDP, exports too, oil and gas is a huge portion of that. Have y'all looked at broken that down in your data and given that part of the analysis a look?
Yes, so you're 100% right. So the question is, I guess, is what share of our exports are coming from the oil and gas economy, as opposed to what share of our jobs are employed in oil and kind of, let's call it kind of the downstream petrochemical sector. Yes, so if you look at our website, you can actually see the gross regional product breakdown for the Baton Rouge area. A substantial amount of our exports come from our manufacturing base, right? So that is going to be dominated by what we manufacture. What we manufacture substantially has been linked to the kind of the petrochemical sector for sure. But what's fascinating is to see where job growth is occurring. and the change we see in, for example, the amount of employment that's happening in these other industry sectors. We've seen these 4 big priorities for the Baton Rouge area in terms of where we diversify. We're going to diversify not only in we think, kind of transitional energy and new renewable projects that are coming. The second big opportunity we see is around life sciences and healthcare as that sector continues to grow. And we think the share, for example, of destination healthcare is going to continue to grow as well. The third big area of software and technology that we see as an opportunity for future growth, and it's already been something we've seen over the last decade. And the fourth really comes from the kind of this space of coastal water science and sustainability with what we already see at the Water Institute. And those 4 sectors are the ones we're putting a lot of our emphasis on for national opportunities to continue to expand. What you're pointing out is kind of where does export opportunity come from? We think all 4 of those have opportunities to be export oriented, but what they might be exporting are ideas, not just products, if you would think of it that way.
All right, that's our time. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you for having me.